Hi, welcome back to another episode of Wilken and Gutton Plans the Balance Sheet Breakdown. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about generative AI and how things like ChatGPT have begun to work their way into the profession. I'm Chris Frederick, a partner with the firm, and joining me today is who I would call our firm's in-house expert on the topic, Karolis Matulis. Karolis, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. I kind of consider myself I've been a nerd longer than I've been a CPA, so this is a topic that I'm very excited to talk about.
Yeah. Thinking about it, right, to me, not super tech heavy, right? It's not something I'm necessarily super passionate about. I think about generative AI being around for about a year, right? That, hey, when ChatGPT came on the scene, that's when it came on the scene. But, as we're prepping for this conversation, that's not maybe how you feel about it.
Yeah. So, I think you kind of bring up a great point that, it really hit mainstream a year and some change ago with ChatGPT. And I think the real big change here was the fact that you didn't really have to write code. What you could interact with was a search box.
Yeah.
If you go back to the early 2000s, I remember Ask Jeeves. The dream of Ask Jeeves was you would ask Jeeves what you wanted to do on the internet, and Jeeves would go out and do it for you. So I think with ChatGPT, we really kind of realized that dream of I want to do something, or I want to learn about something, I want to ask something. Let me ask inside this kind of search engine type of box that's very familiar to everybody, and let me get an output. And I think what's brilliant about ChatGPT is the fact it's very interactive. You can kind of ask your question, and you'll get a response. And then depending on the response, the true magic of it is, and folks that haven't played around with it, I encourage you to do so, is when you get a response, treat it like a conversation with a person. Ask a follow-up question, but AI, or what we kind of refer to it as AI, I think it's kind of a Wizard of Oz moment. Really pulling back the curtain on it. These are mathematical and statistical models that operate on a probabilistic basis. And part of what we'll call hallucinations, or part of whatever the output is, that we're not really satisfied with the output. That's a function of every ChatGPT output. I would preface in your own mind as the answer is probably, and then whatever the big old thing that it typed up, that's the answer. So take it with a grain of salt. But the math and the stats that have enabled ChatGPT to exist as a product, they date back to the 50s and 60s. It's just that we didn't really have the raw compute to kind of get to the point that we're at now.
And to your point, right, it certainly is super interactive. I mean, like an example is you can ask it how to make pancakes, so it'll give you the pancake recipe. If you don't have eggs, you can say, hey, I don't have any eggs, and it'll immediately update the recipe, make pancakes without eggs, right? And so I didn't realize how interactive it was when I started playing with it, and then I was working with somebody here. And they didn't like the first response. They responded back, hey, can you make this longer, or can you include XYZ? I'm thinking, I don't know, you could talk to the machines. I thought it was just ask a question, get an answer, ask a question, get an answer, as opposed to really how interactive it is.
Yeah. So, the example that I'll probably give right now is one that's, I'm considering putting some solar panels on my roof. And I don't know anything about it. So, the way that I went about it is I kind of just started a conversation with ChatGPT saying, how much sun can one expect in the state of New Jersey per day, on average. It told me it's 5 hours. And then it's like, okay, well, with 5 hours of sunlight, based on this available roof space, how many panels can I put on there? How much energy does that produce? Here, let me give you some assumptions of, here's my price per kilowatt hour. Here's the incentives that I can get from the federal government, from the state of New Jersey. Here's some assumptions on what an average installation costs. And actually, that was one of the things that I kind of asked it in the conversation. Here's what you can expect to pay for an installation. And then I kind of went through all these assumptions, and I was actually able to build a model within ChatGPT where I can modify the variables of, here's my roof space, here's my cost of electricity, here's the kind of quoted price for a job. and figure out what the break even is on that project, all within the span of, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour.
Right.
Knowing nothing about the subject going into it, I was kind of able to very quickly, I guess, find somewhat of an expert.
Right.
And ask the questions that I wanted to ask to kind of bring myself up to speed on that particular topic.
It's not authoritative, right? So it's kind of prefaced by a probably. There's a lot of content out there all across the web about solar and what the outputs can expect to be. It's able to, in most cases, pull together some model to point you in a direction.
And there's definitely kind of points where it goes off the rails, and you kind of have to monitor the output and kind of sanity check each step. But it's really, the way that I view it in our profession, it's a force multiplier. You can do more with less time, and in professional services, we're always squeezed for time.
Yep.
So anything that we can kind of do in our day-to-day to get a better return for our unit of time is definitely appreciated.
It's a bit like having a support staff, right? So obviously, if ChatGPT didn't exist, you could have Googled, all about solar, visited 40 different websites, built your own model in Excel, and it would have taken you 3 hours. But hey, having artificial assistant streamlines that process a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of view it as an intern.
Okay.
So for me, it's you think of a task, you tell the intern to go do the task, and then they kind of go and they search the web, kind of find some information, and hopefully synthesize it. They come back to you and they say, "This is what I found. Here's some math that I attempted to do, or here's what I attempted to do with that information." You kind of review it. You make sure that it makes sense. Where the stuff that it doesn't make sense, you let it know that, hey, this doesn't make sense. Like, please change it.
Yep.
And then as you just would, send the intern back to the drawing board to kind of build the next step of the project. You kind of just enter it in this chat box and say, hey, like, here's the next steps of what I want to do with everything that you brought back here. And you kind of iteratively build on that, and hopefully you get to the output that you're looking for.
And thinking about how that maybe applies to our industry, right? Finance and accounting. I think your example is super applicable for any realm of financial modeling, estimation, how it can possibly be used in audits, comps, reviews, tax return prep. I mean, there's plenty of opportunities, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I think in a lot of the financial modeling bit, you have to have somewhat of, I guess we'll say, a technological mindset, or kind of you need to have an idea of how to structure a calculation. But the way that you go about it is you really are giving it an outline in Word form of here's how I want to build this particular model and kind of set it off. So obviously in the context of financial modeling, whatever question you may have, whether it's relating to your sales, your inventory, you can actually feed it. The one element that I really love about ChatGPT is you can take an entire file, a CSV file of data, and you can feed that CSV file into ChatGPT, and then you can start having a conversation with your data, saying, what are the sales that I have in the month of January from location A of product Y. And it's very good at kind of parsing through that data and finding those answers for you. You're able to kind of visualize the data. So that's kind of, I guess we'll call the business side. On the tax and auditing side, I will maintain that ChatGPT is really best at generating what we'll say is text. That's really the thing that it's best at. So in the context of an audit, with the product, the report that the deliverable that you produce being an audit report, a lot of times there's footnotes in there. A lot of times there's kind of, we'll call text, word salad, that I think a lot of times the users of the audited financial statements, I don't know that they read through all of these. I don't know when you get your hands on somebody's audited financial statement. We naturally, as we look at a lot of the same kind of document, will kind of gravitate to the things that are important within the document. So a lot of the words that are kind of surrounding that, I know we often think that there's great value in crafting all of that, But that's the kind of stuff that ChatGPT is actually very good at, just kind of generating all of the surrounding context for your actual data. So you can get to a point where you're able to generate particular footnotes for your financial statement by just feeding it context of saying, here's the actual numbers that I want to put in this note, and it'll generate the entire note for you, and you can, just kind of saddle it into your report. You obviously have to kind of review what it's done.
Ensure that it's accurate, ensure that,
And this is all going to kind of permeate through, I think, a lot of the audit packages. The tool that the AI CPA is working on now, I think will have a lot of these features, because at that point you'll kind of start peeling back the onion and the layers there. In reality, you should be able to take what we'll call a trial balance or a general ledger, and get to a point where you're able to feed all of that data into an LLM or other types of generative models, and basically say, hey, like, what is the risk of such thing, and how does, with the context of the audit standards, generate a footnote based on this part of the general ledger, and I think it'll be able to do that within a couple of years.
And so, to your point about footnotes, right? And kind of combining a few things you've said, right? The ability to maybe write footnotes, and also understanding that, hey, this is giving intern level outputs. I think folks should be opening up a blank Word document, writing point one in the title, and just trying to write footnotes from scratch
every time.
Right, like that seems like a bit much when, hey, ChatGPT or the like can get you 70% of the way there. It's that there is a lot of standardization, and standardization to me is what ChatGPT is good at.
Yeah. So one of the things that we haven't really talked about is ChatGPT is actually the thing that is probably best at is actually writing code, because a lot of the training data that it was trained on were resources like Stack Overflow, which for the folks that are kind of write code, it'll sound very familiar. So it's been trained on a lot of that. But the reason why I kind of bring this up is in coding and programming, a lot of times you'll be writing a whole lot of text. You'll be doing a whole lot of typing to accomplish something that is kind of like very small. So what generative AI allows us to do is write code very quickly by saying, write code to do this thing, and I'll write you, the 10 lines that you need to do that. So instead of spending your time writing the 10 lines manually, you write one line that describes it, and ChatGPT writes the rest, and then you check it.
Yeah.
So in the same way, if we kind of apply that to, natural language and the footnote scenario, you can get to the same point where it's like, write a footnote that accomplishes X, Y, and Z, and it will go and do it. I do think that depending on the use case, and kind of, so ChatGPT is a very, we'll call a general model. If we develop a tool for writing notes, it can get to a point where, it's not performing at an intern level, it's performing at, an associate senior level, because that's the only thing that's trained
its only
to
task.
do.
It's not it's not a generalist. It's, I'm an expert in XYZ. If all you need is XYZ, we got you.
Yeah, exactly.
There's just been articles recently in the Wall Street Journal about concerns of plagiarism and what all is maybe in the purview of ChatGPT for future answers. With that, my maybe first thought is, hey, that's a red flag for data security.
Yeah. So, well, there's two things on that. So, data security, I think, is one element that's critical here. I want to get back to the second point in a minute. So, data security is, I would say, the best practice is you don't want to put any personally identifiable information in there, business identifiable information, because all of that data is kind of added to the ChatGPT corpus. It becomes, part of OpenAI's kind of larger training set. So the model's kind of based on the output that it gives you. If the output is good, then the subsequent answers for users that are kind of requesting similar things will kind of skew towards an answer that's good. I think that feature is still up there where you can kind of give it a thumbs up or thumbs down.
It sure is.
Yeah, that's there for it to learn what a good answer is and what a bad answer is, and it'll give you more good answers rather than bad answers. But in the same token, that any kind of prompts that you're putting in there are becoming part of kind of the new open AI training set. The other point that you kind of touched on in terms of plagiarism is going to be the idea that in a similar way where you kind of have this iterative model, I guess, kind of improvement, what you're also going to have is the model corpus changing and the training data changing. So the one thing that's probably going to be litigated out in courts will kind of be the copyright, like who owns the data. I think what we're going to be seeing over the next couple of years is data is the most valuable part that organizations have. And it's going to become very important for organizations kind of to secure their data and kind of not put that out there into the open AI ether. The one thing that I think I really want to talk about is the fact that these models are all going to converge on each other in terms of the math and the stats that's being applied. If you feed it the same data, you're actually going to get the same answers. So the reason why company data is going to be of utmost importance, or having proprietary data is going to be most important, that's going to become the special sauce that's going to distinguish, our model versus somebody else's model. Because if you're just using the information that I guess we'll say is kind of publicly available on the internet, all of these models are going to kind of converge on the same answer, and they're all going to give the same answer. So for it to actually give a different answer, it's going to have to be trained on different data. So companies are really going to have to kind of gate off their data from the outside world to make sure that their special sauce is not leaking out.
It sounds like in some cases, data is going to be even behind more strict paywalls than it is now.
And we're seeing this kind of play out currently. The New York Times, I know Twitter has kind of for OpenAI, so this is really going to play out in the future. The one other element I guess to touch on here, and the way that I like to talk about it is in the context of if anybody's kind of played around with the generative photo features. So what's going to happen is you're going to need to have content that's produced by human beings, because kind of leading up to ChatGPT, all the content, well, most of the content online was generated by human beings. So it learned on content that was generated by human beings. The one thing that's happened within the last year, there's probably been an explosion in blogs and content and all of these sorts of outlets, is the fact that a lot of this content is generated by ChatGPT. So now this AI generated content is entering kind of the training corpus.
It's becoming a circle of
is becoming a circle of AI training on AI data. And this is kind of most visible when you kind of look at images. So if you feed an AI generated image, and then you kind of feed it the resulting image, very quickly you kind of get to a point where it diverges from reality. All of a sudden you're generating images of a horse and it's only got 3 legs. But the AI doesn't really know that a horse is supposed to have 4 legs. It's really just relying on kind of what we'll call a game of telephone of, we've had this image passed around in this game of telephone. The message of it has been lost. But that's the source data that we're using to generate the next image.
It seems like horses have 3 legs. I wouldn't know any different.
So that's going to be a problem, I think, in the coming years of with the explosion of generative content, is going to be the need for content to be generated by human beings with actual kind of novel and interesting thought being put into them, rather than just the boilerplate. Give me an article on generative AI.
For sure. I mean, and hey, that's the job security to all the designers, the graphic designers out there, that these machines can't create original thought. They're merely combining everyone else's thoughts to a new output. So, Karolis, I mean, I had to say, I feel like this conversation is really interesting. I mean, and I look at it to say ChatGPT's been here for about a year. A whole lot more to come if we sit down a year from now and have the same conversation. It's going to be, I would expect it to be totally different.
Yeah, I think so. So obviously we're kind of scratching the surface here currently. We're a year in, and there's been definitely a lot of progress on that front. I do think there's going to be a lot more progress. I know one of the things that we kind of spoke about leading up to this conversation was what are the things that maybe it hasn't done all that well. And I guess for good news for the accountants that are listening to this, I have seen some experiments of folks taking the entirety of the tax code, putting that into ChatGPT as kind of the corpus for answering questions, and expecting the output to be any good. So the one thing that these models don't do particularly well is make long-term connections. So it's very good at making kind of what we'll call short distance connections of like, here's a document. In this paragraph, we talk about concept X, and then we bring up this concept X 4 paragraphs from now. The way that the tax code is structured, it relies on, I guess, what we'll call a lot of foundational knowledge. So there's part of the code that kind of establish the foundational knowledge, but ChatGPT doesn't really know where to start once you ask it a question. Because it hasn't formulated the foundational knowledge. So the one key that's going to be happening is I think there's going to be a lot of companies and businesses racing towards this, ideal of let's imagine, the tax code within a generative AI model. And I think the way that it's going to have to get there is we're actually going to have to train it on the foundational concepts, and kind of build the ability to generate meaningful answers within the context of something like the tax code, the same way that you would train an intern.
I would say, like, teach it the foundation, turn it from an intern to a senior, and then feed it the rest of the tax code, and all of a sudden, having that foundational knowledge, you can get something out of it.
Yeah, but that's a much longer road than kind of asking it, what's the standard exemption this year. So one of the things that I guess has been successful is you can take the 1040 instructions, saddle it into ChatGPT, and you can ask it a very specific question about the PDF that you just gave it. What's the standard exemption? How do I compute? What's my estimated tax liability obligation, and those sorts of things.
And it can pull data from data sources as good as anybody. But like you said, making those longer term connections, it's not there yet.
Yeah, it's not there yet, and that's I think encouraging for folks that are
long-term experts in the area.
Are doom and gloom about the subject. I do think a lot of it is kind of currently a party trick, but the long-term vision I think is really using things like ChatGPT and making them more experts or experts in a particular field, whether it's tax audit or maybe it's the lease footnote, the lease accounting footnote. I've sat in on conversations about using it to read the lease agreement, and kind of pull out the provisions in the lease agreement that pertain to a particular concept within kind of standard lease language. It's like, does this lease contain a provision for a security deposit? And then, what should the security deposit be, and kind of all the other stipulations that are in there. So I think we're going to see kind of more expert LLMs, the language models. And then kind of aside from that, folks are really warming up to the idea of, using AI, or what we'll call AI, for predictions, making predictions. In the context of accounting, we certainly rely on predictions in a lot of what we do, especially on the audit front.
Yeah, for sure. That's a bunch of the audit testing is based on expectations, and did you meet them? So helping set those expectations is seems like an easy connection to make.
Yeah, absolutely. In our CIRA practice, the one kind of the one test that I'm familiar with is the weather. And kind of the snow removal expense. In our practice, we have a ton of data, so in theory, you can kind of go through the weather forecast for a year and use all the data that we already have and make predictions for what we expect an expense should look like for a particular community in a particular town, based on the weather that community experienced.
For sure. I mean, and that goes back to what you were saying about the lease standard, right? That's a fantastic set of data that not everybody has, and so being able to really leverage our available data for our continued benefit.
Yeah. So I think the key is that companies need to be mindful of the data that they have, and begin to understand the power that their data contains, to contribute or explain particular performance in their business.
I feel like that's kind of a great summary of kind of where we are.
The final thoughts are this is here to stay. It's transformative. I view it as kind of a deflationary force.
Yep.
Obviously, for folks that are kind of early adopters, they're going to experience some efficiencies from it. But this is really going to become kind of a key component to how business is conducted. For the folks that are kind of afraid for their jobs, or in a similar way to where you had Microsoft Office come in,
yep,
and be a tool to expand what we do. Generative AI is kind of that same tool. So our jobs are not going to be replaced by AI. It's moving quickly, but as I said, there's a lot of kind of use cases in the general area, but on the specific areas, it's still kind of up for development.
That's great. And again, I appreciate you joining us this month. This is certainly an ever-evolving topic, and again, I'm sure when you're back next year, same time, same place for a similar conversation, it's going to be totally different with what's kind of out there on the marketplace.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how different that conversation is going to be a year from now, because it's certainly the speed at which these things are developing it is very inspiring.
Yeah, for sure. That brings us to the end of another episode of Wilken & Gunton Plans the Balance Sheet Breakdown. I'm Chris Frederick, where we help you make sense of the numbers.